Creek owned, my understanding is, to the middle of the water. So in essence, many, many years ago, this was tried once, and I believe it was Bob Fulton that held it and said no, that the county wanted to take their property through eminent domain and create a trail system through their backyard. And they thought that that issue had been resolved. They came to a city council meeting sometime this summer when all of this started coming up. I want to say it was August. And citizens got up and spoke. And that trail system is still on that map that's in that report. So that would be taking their backyard through eminent domain, which I don't believe is appropriate because it does create safety issues. They own the property and have been taking care of it all this time. And yes, it's a great park, but they own the property. So that was one thing that I noticed in there. And then as you're looking at the list, it is a great wish list. So I would not expedite the report and going through the report. I think more times than not, conversations may happen in the work session, but when it hits the council for decision, that's when you really see what the final document is, and sometimes you're only given, as a citizen, that day, if not a couple weeks, to give true input, because even though they're having discussions, you don't really know where the end is going to fall. So for this Park and Rec study, I would say we need to leave it open because it's a significant wish list. I think we need to really understand it. Plus we need to understand what the ramifications are of the land purchase that they just authorized last night to see is that going to create where we can put ball fields and lacrosse fields, because I know that's a significant issue for citizens. So there are a lot of components of that that need to be vetted from a specific, do we all as citizens really want it? And that could go to a referendum where we're even asking citizens if that's what they want before you actually put it up for bonds so that people are more aware. So.
Sure, please. And that purchase, like I said, it was over the 10-year plan, it's $86 million, but we did just spend $20 million. So I do think we need to reevaluate that now at this given juncture. And then, and there has been a high demand for trails, but that's the good thing about that Coughlin Creek Park that they had. It's, I believe, a half mile of riverfront access, and so we could use trails there. But I don't think it's a necessity of Johns Creek to have every neighborhood connected by a greenway. The back of my property is at Caney Creek, and no offense, I love you neighbors, but I don't want you in my backyard all the time just wandering around. So, and if the city would try to utilize that for eminent domain, that would be, a conflict of interest, because I wouldn't want strangers walking through my backyard. So we can utilize trails, but just in the proper places, I believe.
Thank you. Stephanie, assuming that Fulton County property tax assessed values go up next year, would you vote to A, hold the millage rate where it is, giving taxpayers ultimately an increase, B, vote to select the rollback millage rate, holding taxes where they are, so pick a millage rate that leaves the tax revenue the same, or C, select a millage rate that is lower than the rollback, giving taxpayers a tax cut?
I would roll it back to give the taxpayers a tax cut. We've had a tax increase now for 2 years, and people have run for office saying they would not increase taxes. And so for 2 years, our taxes have been increased, and I think it's appropriate to roll it back. At the same time, though, as I said, moving into governance, we need to figure out what does governance look like from a revenue perspective and from a cost perspective. But as a flat question, I would say I would roll it back to give the money back.
Does the state of Georgia have some advertising or disclosure rules that are required when a municipality or a county is effectively generating additional tax revenue? Is there a method that the state goes through to determine whether or not it is or is not a tax increase?
It is my understanding, and I think it's viewed as what percentage of the property taxes have actually increased, because in watching over the last 2 years, it looks like the county separates so that the whole city doesn't get a tax increase, because I think this is my opinion, if everybody got a tax increase in the same year and everybody realized it, they would stand up and start screaming. So it feels like last year, a third of the city was increased. This year, different people were increased, and I suspect next year, the rest of the city is going to be increased. That's my opinion. The state does do a process where they calculate what is deemed to be a tax increase, and it's based off of, on average for the city, how much more is going to be paid in, and that's how they determined in the last 2 years. Even though the millage rate stayed the same, our property values increased as a city so significantly that they were a tax increase for both years.
Thank you. Chris, do you need the question again?
No. Like Stephanie said, we've had 2 property tax increases the past 2 years in a row. It's 4% and 8%. While it's not going to break the bank from the city taxes. The fact is that we had the unallocated $54 million surplus and we're raising taxes. So I just didn't think it was financially prudent that we have this large sum of money and then we're also raising taxes. I'm glad Lenny and Bob did vote for the rollback this year, but I would probably make the millage rate around 3.7 to roll it back to what it should have been 2 years ago to make it tax neutral.
Thank you. Going back and picking up a question from earlier, do you, Chris, can you think of any specific situations where you think it might be appropriate to raise property taxes or raise taxes on businesses?
Well, we are capped at the charter, I believe, at 4.714. So we're or 4.731, but we're currently at 98% of the cap. So I don't believe we can really feasibly raise taxes more than 1 or 2%. And if that needs to be the case, then I guess so. But currently, when we're running this surplus, I don't think we should ever raise taxes on businesses or residents. Not when we're averaging the 12 to 14% surplus. No.
Thank you.
As of today, I would say no. Now, of course, that could be different in an emergency situation, but currently the city's bringing in $54 million. They've been generating more revenue than they've been spending over the last 8 years, which is what created that. It's actually, it was a $54 million reserve, so it's basically 1 year's worth of revenues. Now they curved off 24 of it. Half of that was for 90-day cash flow float, because there is a float for when we actually receive our revenues in the winter versus when our city starts, so they have to fund those expenses. And then there was also a rainy day fund. So when you look at those two items sitting in a reserve to not be spent, and what's coming in is more than what they've been spending, today I would say no. But once you get to steady state and can identify, then that would be a different conversation, because there can always be an emergency or something that the city does want to do. But looking at it from today, I would say no.
Thank you. Have you reviewed the economic development plan, the city's economic development plan, and based on that plan, do you have any comments or observations?
So that document was like that thick, and I've been campaigning for the last 8 or 9 weeks, so I did review it, and there were a couple things. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I definitely looked at it. It identified that it basically is looking for businesses the city is partnering with the chamber and is partnering with Johns Creek Advantage to look at large business to come into the city. And the report was basically, from my perspective, looking at not organic growth, but directed growth with government involvement. So that was interesting. So you're looking at large business. And then as you looked at some of the details, who it was identifying that they were targeting and some of the shortfalls that our city didn't have was infrastructure is our biggest issue with transportation, which is why a large company wouldn't come here. It also talked about not having the right high-density housing for the workforce that would need to be here. And so as I read it, and again, I didn't spend a lot of time with it, but it sure seemed to have specifics there that then modeled what we were shown from the renderings from the district. That is just, so in looking at the environment that economic development plan was specifying, it was looking for millennials, it was looking for workers to be able to move here in density housing they could afford. It was talking about transportation, but the biggest item that was a drawback from a business coming here is the lack of infrastructure. And then we go right back into that same discussion about how you and I can't get to the city timely. How could another business bring in? So that was kind of my take on just reviewing it.
So a lot of the comments around development in the area are that we don't have the ability because of infrastructure to attract large companies. As an example, about 30% of the contact lenses in the world are manufactured right here in the city limits of Johns Creek, and a company came out here when we were sort of in the middle of nowhere. So sort of how are we different today than we were back then, and what attracted businesses to the area back then?
Well, we were all farmland, and so they could have their corporate headquarters sitting in the middle of fields, and they could get to and from all the highways pretty quickly. We weren't close to an airport, but when they were here as well, you could get to Atlanta Airport in a reasonable amount of time, or if they were flying private jets, you could get to PDK. So what's changed is we've developed, we've grown, we've put a lot more people on property that didn't have that many more people, and then putting those cars on the roads, as well as all the new schools. Because just in the last 10 years, we've had at least 4 or 5 new schools built, which means people have moved here with kids, you've got those buses on the road. So I think it's just the density of people having moved further out and the growth here. And they could have been offered tax breaks to come, but I suspect it was a while ago. That's Alcon, right, that you're talking about? Yeah.
Thank you. Chris?
I have reviewed the plan, and I support some elements of it when it talks about supporting better infrastructure for water, sewer, broadband, and traffic congestion. I don't necessarily agree with subsidizing the redevelopment of Tech Park, and that's a large component of it that we could potentially use funding to revitalize Tech Park. Well, I just don't think it's the government's role to support the property owners of Tech Park and redevelop it. That could be a risky investment. What if it doesn't pan out and the taxpayers pay for all the redevelopment of Tech Park and it doesn't attract the businesses because our traffic is still bad? So I would probably first allocate that money to traffic relief before I would try to revitalize Tech Park. I would also probably try to reform our business tax model and communicate that. Because we're currently taxed much higher than our neighbors like Alpharetta, Roswell, and things like that. So if we could be more competitive in that nature, I don't think the revitalization of Tech Park is necessary. I would like the property owners of Tech Park to do that. The thing is, if it would be economically sustainable for them, why aren't the Tech Park property owners doing that? So that's the question I kind of ask. Why aren't they doing it if it's economically sustainable? Why do they need the tax incentives?
Does the Owners Association of Tech Park own all of the streets and the infrastructure? Who owns all the streets and the infrastructure?
I think the city owns the infrastructure.
Yeah, got it. Chris, starting with you, this is about waste. The city's authority allows the licensing of waste removal companies and designation of specific carriers to specific areas, including the cost as part of the city's tax authority. Do you support the city's control of homeowner waste removal choices and payments, and why or why not?
No, I believe that competition will lead to even cheaper options to the citizens.
Stephanie?
I think it was about 5 years ago the city looked at a waste ordinance. It was partly required by strings of the grant that they had taken, but they were looking at that and charging an extra fee to business owners for taking their waste away, and then also managing. Ultimately, their conversation was trying to manage the waste companies. They're licensed, so they have to pay a fee on who can come into the city, and then there are also requirements on, they wanted to do some requirements on some of the fees for businesses in other areas. I do not believe it is the government's job to manage the waste management companies. I think that creates an issue. The free market is going to take care of it, and that's where pricing. They originally said that they wanted the council in their discussions so that they could manage better pricing and put their prices on a website and then track that for individuals who could go look. And I know there are some subdivisions that also look at it and they contract with a single company. But I think when you have a free market system, you're able to manage those prices better because someone's always trying to get your business versus which companies have been picked and which ones should be allowed. And then you start running into where they don't have to necessarily offer cheaper prices. So I don't agree with fees being charged, and I don't agree with the government managing.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you know if the state of Georgia has any requirements regarding reporting from municipalities, counties, and cities regarding the disposal of waste?
They do, because we've taken their dollars. And so when we take some of those grants that are specific to departments that manage it, we're then tied to the requirements that grant puts on the city to do all that reporting. So they do have requirements to report, and they're supposed to report X as recyclable versus X% that's trash.
Okay. Chris, do you have anything you want to add? Starting with you, Stephanie, do you support the city having its own school system? If so, how would that be accomplished? If not, what is your alternative, or are things okay like they are? Which I actually added that last bit.
No, I do not think the city should take over the schools. I think Fulton County should maintain them, but I think that, so I'm not a supporter of Common Core. I know that that may not necessarily be a municipal issue, but I think that that definitely impacts some of the education that the children are receiving. And I think right now, keeping it at the county level, but keeping parents engaged in the process to understand how they can be involved in their children's lives and in the schools. I think that if we pull the schools down to the city, you're adding an extra level of bureaucracy. And then, so Fulton County, you know, the teachers may come with it, but I think just leave it the way it is and then let the county maintain it. But I think that Common Core needs to be looked at and people need to look at the curriculum for their kids.
Thank you.
No.
Could you elaborate on
But
that?
I just think, again, I think the city's role is infrastructure, police, fire, and parks and rec.
Could the city create its own school system if it wanted to? Would the state of Georgia allow it? I don't know that.
I mean, Marietta took over their schools. You have Marietta City Schools. You have different cities that have schools. So I don't see why you couldn't.
Atlanta has its.
Yeah, Atlanta City has its.
Is there not a moratorium